we will get going. I know we have some more folks that are going to be joining us, but thank you to all of you who've logged on so far. Meg Ryan with the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and Carson Eilers with Policy Director of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. We have our trustee Cassidy Hansen behind the scenes, doing all the zooming in and zooming out and technical stuff. So if you have questions and can't hear us or things like that, just drop us a line in the chat box. And we're very happy to be able to have Alyssa Gamble with Department of Workforce Services, Housing and Community Development here today to help us navigate the changes to the moderate income housing plan that were up before the state legislature this year. And spoiler alert, the date is the same. The date is the same, August 1st, August 1st. We did not change the dates this year. But there were a couple of other additions that we will get into. And I think we also will have Christina Oliver, the Director of Housing and Community Development, joining us shortly as well. Thank you guys all for logging on. We will use the chat box. Alyssa would like to kind of walk through her presentation a little bit before we get into specific questions. But that's what today is for. And then also to let you know about the upcoming resources to help you get the reporting done this year. I wanted to deviate for 1 second and talk a little bit about subdivisions for a second, since this is the group that also had the earlier deadline for compliance with the subdivision streamlining process is this February. And first of all, I just want to, on behalf of the league, thank you. Thank you for the effort you guys made and for getting those things completed. And then secondly, I wanted to just do a quick reminder that one of the requirements was to post your application forms, your checklists on the websites. And so I know that may have dropped through the cracks or maybe they're all up there, but if you could do that, that would be great. And Paul did not pay me, but Paul Larson, Brigham Cities, is one of the most easiest and quickest and complete ones I found when I was just doing a random scan. So thank you, Brigham City, for doing that. And then we did have Christina just drop on to join us. It says Alyssa, but it is in fact Christina Oliver, the Director of Housing and Community Development. Thank you for joining us, Christina. With that said, Carson, do you have any other opening remarks or?
No, thanks for being here. I guess I'll quickly mention that the recording will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel. Those are links with Workforce Services as well if they want to post it. So if you're not able to make it, if you have to leave early, we will have the resource available for you to watch and rewatch as many times as you want.
Excellent. And we also will drop the presentation slide deck into the chat box here momentarily. Christina, anything you'd like to open up with this morning or this afternoon?
No, just grateful that this is being hosted. Thank you.
Excellent. With that, we've got Alyssa bookended here. Carson and I won't let her out of the room. We've got her blocked, so this is the time to ask all your questions. And let's go, Alyssa. Awesome. I'm gonna steal the keyboard.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. We are. Oh, it's not sharing yet. We'll wait. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. So we're really excited for this year's reporting period because, yay, no changes to the timeline were made. We are so excited that that is something that remained consistent. And really the changes were fairly minor for the subsequent progress reports. And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. So, let me just, no? Okay, we'll do that. So today we're just high-level overview of who the moderate income housing reporting applies to, what the requirements are. We'll go over some process and timeline, and then some incentives and restrictions to keep an eye out for. We have also created a handful of resources, and we also have several different training and engagement opportunities with you all that I want to get into. We've all seen this before, just the high-level overview of who this applies to. So Cities and counties of a certain size are required to include a moderate income housing element in the general plan and report annually on compliance with these requirements. So this applies to cities of the first, second, third, or fourth class, fifth class cities with a population of 5,000 or more, and are also in a county of the first, second, or third class, or counties of the first, second, or third class. The easier way is we have a handy list on our website where you can see if this applies to you. We did not have any new communities added this year, so same group reporting as 2023. Due dates and timelines hasn't changed. The report will be posted to our website and made available for you all by May 1st. It is due no later than August 1st. We have made a few changes to our reporting form. So it will be a Qualtrics survey this year. This is based on some feedback that we received from you all. You will have recently received an email from me asking for the contact information for the staff from your community that's going to be working on the moderate income housing report. You'll actually receive a direct email with a link that will allow you to enter and exit the survey as long as you are accessing it from the same browser, the same link, and using the same computer. So that is exciting. You will not have to fill it all in one sitting, unless you choose to use the link on our website, which will also be available. That option will not save your progress. So just keep that in mind. We'll get into a little bit more, but there is a requirement to submit zoning maps and tables. So this can either be done in the form of a shapefile or a link, which the Qualtrics form will allow you to upload the link. We're not able to accept shapefiles directly in the Qualtrics form. So we will also be providing you an uploading option if you choose to use shapefiles to meet this requirement. Overall, the changes to the form address some of the feedback received from last year about word count. There is not a form-wide word count cap now. Per question, the the character count is 20,000 characters. So you should have more than enough space to complete your entry for each question in the report. We have already talked about the option to save progress. You will also have the opportunity to attach documents or links if that is helpful for demonstrating your progress on certain strategies. And we've also made some updates to some of the questions, making them a little bit more clear for each strategy, and also just making the market response a narrative response. So you just type that in. There's no longer the additional fields asking for specific data points. So requirements, initial report is required in your first year, or if your community is making updates to your implementation plan. We have heard from several of you that there are upcoming or have been recent changes to your implementation plan. You will be asked to submit an initial report telling us what those changes were, and allowing us, HCD, to review those changes for compliance, just making sure they meet the requirements for the initial report. Subsequent reports, this is required in every year starting in your second year. So even if you make changes to your implementation plan, we are still asking that you submit a subsequent progress report describing what you've been doing in the last year to move your strategies forward. This is done administratively, which is nice for you, the subsequent report, and it documents progress on the previous 12 months. We're defining this as anything from August 1st through July 31st. So August 1st of 2023 through July 31st of 2024. So for those of you that need to make any changes to your initial report, to your implementation strategies, implementation plan or strategies, just remember these 3 things that are required in your initial report. This one does require that you update your housing element, so getting this right does save quite a bit of time down the line. There's a minimum number of strategies required. So for most communities, that's 3. If you have a transit station, a fixed skyway transit station, so bus rapid transit or tracks, that's going to be 5 strategies minimum to comply. If you have that fixed skyway transit station, there's also some strategy type requirements that we'll get into. Please use the exact language from the state code. And then also make sure that there's a 5-year implementation plan with each of your associated to each strategy. So what we would expect to see in the implementation plan is the 5-year timeline, and then specific benchmarks or actions that you're completing within that timeline. We are looking for time-bound language. So that would be something like quarterly, annually, year 1, year 2, year 3, providing a specific year, season, quarter that something is going to be done, something that's identifiable for us to know when the strategy would be completed. Here's the summary of the required strategy counts. If you're a county, your minimum is 3. And we've gone over the municipal counts. Exact language. My recommendation is to just copy and paste directly from the state code. And then this is some detail about what we would expect to see in your implementation plan. So just remember, 5-year timeline, specific and measurable benchmarks within that timeline. For your subsequent report, we have actually had 2 changes, 2 additions this year. So you will still be reporting on your actions, land use regulations, barriers, market response, accessory dwelling units, and providing us recommendations. There's been the addition of zoning maps and tables, and also a count of entitled units. So we will just go through fairly quickly what we would expect to see in each element. So for actions, this is just what you completed in the last 12 months to move your strategy and implementation plan forward. This can be inclusive of any research, engagement, meetings that you've done to move your specific task or benchmark forward. You can see here from the example that includes meeting, doing research, drafting ordinances, completing studies, whatever that looks like in your community for your given strategy.
Can I just add, Alyssa? A lot of this stuff I know is sort of your data, if you're a planner or a community development director, this is a lot of your just day-to-day work. So our recommendation is just to document that when you're doing anything that is associated with that kind of strategy, even if you're not necessarily doing with the plan or report in mind. Just make sure that if you're doing it, you're documenting it. So it's hopefully much easier on the reporting side because you can just take that information and log it into the Qualtrics form.
Yeah, great point. Thank you, Carson. Land use regulations and decisions. This is fairly similar to the actions. You will just be going one level more specific by only talking about the specific land use regulations and decisions that came out of the previous actions. So thinking back to the reporting on the actions question, we talked a lot about research. This response will really zero in on, what were the decisions, conversation, outcomes from working with the Planning Commission City Council or County Commission. And there is also that second, this is kind of a 2-part response. So you'll talk about what was done and how it actually moves your strategy forward. So remember to include both of those. in your report. Both prompts are in the report for you. Barriers, so this would be anything that came up as you were moving the implementation plan forward in the last 12 months. This can range, we talked about this quite extensively at a previous meeting, but anything from public concern to, in the last year, we saw a lot of supply chain issues submitted in the moderate income housing reports. Council or planning commission turnover, any of these could be cited as a barrier. So this is an area where you can really tell your story about what is going on within your community, and what the actual challenges to a municipality or a county are in moving moderate income housing activities forward. So we really recommend that you be as detailed as possible in this section. So you see here in the example, it's pretty succinct. You know, I would almost recommend going further and saying, look, here were the concerns. Here's how we responded. We updated our plan, policy, project in these ways. Or, you know, this has led to ongoing discussion and we actually need to go back to the drawing board and adjust. Both of those would be great responses.
And the reason that's important for us to gather is if we can try to ascertain that there's some issue that maybe we can help legislatively fix or some other resource. That's why it's important for us to be able to have that narrative.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is also really helpful from our end, from a technical assistance standpoint as well, where we can maybe say, hey, we're noticing these challenges across multiple municipalities or counties in the state. You know, is it an information? Is it a staff? Is it, you know, what resource would be helpful here?
There's a couple of questions.
Yeah.
And you can answer these later, whatever fits. So there's a couple of communities who've made changes to their implementation plan, or you can just change strategies. The reports ask for different fields, right? So you would want them to report on the initial report for what's new and the subsequent report for what's happened in previous years, correct?
Correct, yeah, and that does get a little bit trickier as depending on your timing for making your update, right? I know of a couple of communities that updated their implementation plan this fall after they submitted for 2023. So if you have progress that you could report on any updates that you've made, you can certainly include those in your progress report.
Yeah, the intent behind these reports, again, is really showing your work, showing that you're planning proactively for growth and for moderate income housing. So we want to make sure we can capture as much information as possible so that the legislature recognizes the efforts you're taking. Again, even if it's small things that you don't necessarily think of as implementation, if you're reaching out to your AOGs, if you're working on plans, make sure you're documenting that so you can tell your story.
Yeah, and on that front, I'll just give a quick example. There was a community that their strategy called for them to engage, identify a developer to begin I think it was a 55 and older project, but to begin a housing project within their community. And they were really struggling to actually identify a specific developer in their report. So they had sent out letters to specific developers to kind of get an idea of what were possibilities for the community. And since their timeline was several years out, they were actually able to count that activity of sending the letters, you know, taking the action, making the engagement with those developers as their progress for last year. So, you know, the things that we're looking for are, does it tie back to your strategy and adopted implementation plan? And is it within your timeline? So If you can meet those two things, you can report any activity for progress.
One other
Yeah.
question, actually, I guess two other questions. So first, there was a question about the new data that was compiled in the database last year. Where could communities find that to help inform their either their reviewing their plans or just their reports going forward?
Totally. I have a slide on that at the end, but we do have a dashboard updated for all of the reporting communities that was put together with the Kim Gardner Policy Institute.
Sure.
So I'll share a link with you all and make sure you have that.
And then maybe we'll just hold these other ones
Yeah.
until the end. We'll get to them all. I'm tracking them and I have them, so they'll get answered. If Carson's not answering in the chat, we'll have Alyssa, and we'll go through them at the end, but let's let her just walk through some more slides.
Yeah, and we're really not that far off. We'll cruise through these next few. Market response. We all responded to this last year. This is how your community is changing or responding to outputs and outcomes from your strategies. So, you could document anything from entitled units or any rehabilitation of units, changes that you're seeing at kind of a higher level across your community, like rent or purchase costs. I 100% understand that there are varying data availability for all of these. So again, we've transitioned this question kind of to more of a narrative where you can just type in what you're seeing as a result of moving these strategies forward. And this, again, is part of the storytelling that we're trying to get across. Give us any, positive, negative, neutral outcomes as you report. Accessory dwelling units. This question has not changed. We're still just looking for a count and how you're tracking them. All right, so we'll get into the two pieces of data that are new for this year. So zoning maps and tables, you will be asked to provide either a shapefile or a website link to your maps and tables. So like I said, we'll be sending out an upload option if you do have a shapefile. They're just larger documents, and Qualtrics unfortunately doesn't accept shapefiles in the attachments. So that is why we're going that route. Also know that providing a link is an option for you if you don't have shapefiles. If you have any questions, you're always welcome to email me, and I can walk you through how to send those in. Entitled units. So this is a new addition for this year as well. You'll be asked to provide a count of the residential dwelling units that have been entitled, but they do not yet have a building permit as of the submission date. So similar to accessory dwelling units, this is to the best of your ability, right? We know that there's pretty varied tracking among communities on entitled units. So we've broken this question down into a couple of questions in the submitted report or in the report that you will be submitting. So first it will ask just for, the count of residential dwelling units that have been entitled but have not received building permits. The second question asks how your community or at what point in the development process your community considers a unit to be entitled. So is it preliminary plat? Is it final plat? Just tell us where in that process. We went back and forth on how to draft this question, and it didn't seem as helpful to tell you what your definition should be or could be, rather than just get that data from you. So that's what we're asking for. There will be some optional questions about infrastructure. That is just helpful for us. And I think, the league as well, to know where these units are in the development process, right? So do they have all of the infrastructure or is it just partial? That's how those questions look. And again, those are options.
So, and I want to add on this just a little bit. Many of your communities already provided this information to us in our survey last year. So hopefully some of the methodology can be pretty similar. The intent is to capture the number of units, housing units, and not even necessarily lots, but housing units. If it's a multifamily project that you have that don't have a building permit yet. So if somebody has a right to build a residential unit in your community, either through base zoning, so if you have an area that's zoned, that's totally undeveloped, that could be counted. If you have a master development agreement where no permits have been drawn yet, but you have a certain amount of density or housing units that you've given them a legal right to build, that's what we're trying to capture. We're trying to understand what's in the beginning points of the building pipeline, so we can better understand how communities are planning for growth, what those kind of obstacles are. This is kind of a tricky number, so please take the time to think through it. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We want this to be as robust and accurate as possible, but recognizing that your communities might calculate this differently, we wanted to give you the flexibility to be able to figure it out and just show your math, I guess. So we have kind of an understanding of how communities are doing it. Again, this has been a really critical metric for us is in talking about growth and helping inform state policy. So it's really important that you really take the time to figure out what this number looks like for your community.
And I knew this one would we all knew this one would generate some questions in there. So I'm going to deviate for a second just while we're on this topic to make sure. So a lot of questions in there. What's the definition of an entitled? And the approach that DWS is taking is that.
Yeah, so we want to know what your definition is.
Yeah.
What do your community, your city, your county, what do you consider an entitled unit? So it is an open entry field. So you can just write in at what point in your process, whether through development agreement or, platting, whatever that looks like for your community, what is an entitled unit? Because it got too messy and prescriptive, I think, from our perspective to tell you, well, we think that an entitled unit is this, when that might actually not capture what's going on in cities across the state.
And it's all units. Thank you, Rhoda, for that, and Carson for the clarification in the chat. It's all entitled unit, not just moderate income housing. We're trying to get the full picture. And then Bill was saying, do you want to see all units that are possible in the community based on zoning? It's zoning or development agreements. Some communities use lots of development agreements. So again, while you're looking to us for the definition, we kind of flipped the switch and said, it's your definition. And we're trying to get the best picture possible. Melinda asked, what if we don't keep track of that data? So let's talk about that and what DWS is kind of looking for. Like ADUs, like some of us track it, some of us don't. So we've had some experience there, but maybe Lucy could talk a little bit about the expectation on this one since it is new.
Yeah, and so that is to the best of your ability. It could be similar to what Bill stated, right? If it is part of your what was Bill's was as part, like tracking it based on your zoning.
So
or
this is actually,
alignment.
that was one which we were having a lot of other chatter about, which we'll get to in a second, but Melinda's was more like, what if we don't even have an idea of that? Like, what if we don't even know what our entitled units are?
So I think you could go about this a couple of ways, and I also think Christina has probably some input as well. So I'll give my first stab and then we'll pass it to her. I think you could probably look at it from a zoning or general plan perspective, right? Like how many units would be possible in your community based on zoning.
Yes, we have a variety of sophistication based on the community, but this is the new ask. So You may not have tracked it, but we're asking you to track it.
And so this is
year.
an opportunity also
Yeah.
for us to identify, technical assistance moving forward. What additional help is needed across communities to provide this data? So again, similar to AUs, to the best of your ability, get to that number, Christina.
Yeah, just as a little bit of information, background information, the reason that this is a topic and now data we're trying to collect is because we hear far too often generalized statements, and this is from both sides of the aisle. We have over 100,000 entitled units. It's the developer's problem. They aren't developing. And then we hear from the other side of the house that says, well, we are entitled. However, there are infrastructure improvements that need to be made within the city in order for us to have utilities that will serve this development. So it's this chicken and egg conversation. What we have found throughout not only the past two sessions, but last session, it's a constant theme, is we're getting stories, anecdotes, but not necessarily hardcore data. So coming back to that zoning map topic that Alyssa had addressed briefly, your zoning map, current zoning map, should be able to dictate the initial question, which is how many actual units are entitled? They're not going through the process, like what is going on, what does it look like on the ground right now, as is condition. And then the second piece is looking at those that are ready to develop. So have the needed infrastructure, if any, have the needed infrastructure improvements been completed, or are they in process in order for those developments to be built in the near term future? There is no way for cities to, I like here, the question's already coming at me. There is no way that you can predict what's going to happen in the future. We recognize that. But you probably have a good idea of one or two developments that are moving along in an expedited manner, where you can see that those units are going to come to fruition within, 1, 2, 3 years, or the first home's going to be sold in 2 years. That's the type of information we're looking for. So on the Hill, when we say, or with the league, right, we're in combination and partnership, we walk through and we say, well, there's hundreds of thousands of units entitled in the state of Utah. The message that's received is, well, the cities are prohibiting the development. We want the cities and the developers to really clarify what it is that is deficient for us to, or for them to develop, and that type of material. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, again, this is strictly for fact finding to help inform policy. I promise that it is discussed in almost every housing meeting that comes up. So this is trying to get a broader scope of that information. A lot of communities do capture this already, especially high growth communities. Yes, it does take some additional work if your community isn't doing a lot of development through development agreements or specific contracts. But again, we wanted to capture a wide net as possible. So our baseline definition is, does somebody have a legal right to build residential units on that property? How many? So if you don't track it as your zoning map, if you consider it late preliminary, that's totally fine. We just want to know where you're putting it. Again, you're not being graded on this. You're not being evaluated based on this. This is a for effort kind of metric where it's trying to understand, our communities planning for growth, because if somebody has a legal right to build there, you have an obligation to plan there. So we're trying to just understand what our pipeline or what our inventory looks like in the future, where the growth is projected to be, where that can happen. So again, this is not going to be the end all be all number. Nobody's going to say, well, you only have 500, you only have 600. It really is just trying to figure out how communities are planning this, how communities are tracking this, so we understand the whole statewide picture.
Yeah, and I appreciate all the interest this has sparked. We knew that this one word, when this was being drafted and we were looking at other words and going through the thesaurus, that this would generate a lot of interest. And so thanks for those that are giving some, again, this is our first year. I think I do want to add, and we'll get into some of these, but while we're on entitlement, one from Andrew that talks about timing. So what if we have a subdivision that's entitled, so is this everything, the universe, it's not within a reporting period. We had a subdivision that we approved 3 years ago, they still haven't built it yet, but it's entitled. So my understanding is it's that entire universe, it's not within the reporting period, is that?
That
Your
is
impression?
correct, yeah. There was not any specific timeline in the code for these entitled unit counts. So we are casting a wide net, like I said earlier, and looking at, from any year up to the, when you submit or when you're completing your report, what was entitled that doesn't have a building permit. And that could actually be pretty interesting data to have over time, especially if you're willing or able to put in any detail in narrative about any longstanding developments that are entitled. They have the legal right to build, but it's been years and there hasn't been a building permit issued. That could be pretty interesting data. So,
And this is an ask, and I know it's different. And the reason there's a lot of chatter in there about we need a uniform definition of entitlement. This has been a conversation again, and I asked you, I mean, all of the reason this approach has sort of been tried is because all of you have a different way of tracking it. And we didn't feel that there was one way that meant the same thing to all of you, and sort of it's representing that individuality. And I think there's the question about if your DWS is getting all this information and how are you going to make sense of it? Maybe you'll speak to that because there's a lot of chatter here about how, is this parcels, is this units, is it, like how are we collating this and what's
Totally.
the end result? And maybe that sheds some light on why we've tried this methodology this way.
absolutely. So, and the code does say dwelling units. I know that does get to be complicated. So the way that we're hoping to collate it is to be able to say, look, we have X number of communities that track it in this way, X number of communities that track it in this way, and then here are the units that are being produced, or that are entitled, for each of those different methods. We understand that it's very similar to accessory dwelling units. I don't know if there's a city across the state that does it exactly the same. So, we want to be able to provide you all with the flexibility to actually demonstrate to us what you're doing. This isn't, go ahead, Christina.
I want to be clear for everyone, including myself, we're directly addressing in the bill lines 103 through line 04. This is HB 465. The number of residential dwelling units that have been entitled that have not received a building permit as of the submission date of the progress report. Is that what all of these questions are referring to?
Yep.
So it just goes back to my original answer. Very easy. Who doesn't have a building permit? Look at your zoning map, who's entitled with no building permit. I say very easy. I recognize there's a lot of background work that needs to occur by staff, but that is the clearest and most concise way that I can say it. Throw a question in the chat if you have one.
And so another way we can also address this on more of an individual basis, because it sounds like a lot of communities are concerned about their particular method of tracking. I provide one-on-ones. I have a schedule that you're able to schedule yourself. So I'm happy to walk through your process and provide guidance on what we would be expecting to see. If it is seeming to be more of an individual community question.
Yeah, and again, I see a lot of discussion about what it means. Like, use the definition that makes sense to you and your communities. We're just asking that you document that. Because again, we're trying to capture, we know everybody has different definitions, so we're trying to capture a wide net. Just put your methodology down. So if you're saying it's only something that's been platted, great, just document that. If you're saying it's anything that's been zoned, awesome, document that. this is the joy of local control, right? Everybody can do things a little bit differently. We just want to make sure that we have the whole scope of information so that we can parse through that and understand what that means. This is, again, not the end all be all number. I'm sure there'll be more policy conversations going forward. This is just our attempt to try to figure out how you're defining entitlement, how you're tracking units, what your build outs are. This is, again, wide scope. We just want as much data as possible so we can take that information and better inform our policy discussions.
Yeah, and let me just, I'm just going to cut in off and on, guys. Sorry, the hand raising isn't as effective. Patrick, you just asked the question, lack of definition is causing confusion. So I think we can overthink this particular data set. What we're looking for is what I said before. What's an entitled unit? It's defined in state code in LUDMA. So that should be pretty easy to look at your zoning map and say, we have this 10-acre parcel that's zoned R12. Well, 10 times 12. That's how many potential units could be there. Now, are they ready for development? No, they aren't, or they haven't pulled a building permit yet, or there's an infrastructure issue. It can be as simple as saying, I mean, you won't know where they are in their own process if you haven't been made aware. So these folks do not have a building permit. If you want to add additional information, which is beneficial to your moderate income housing report in general, and the stories that the league and myself and my team get to talk about during the various meetings that occur starting next month, you can talk about what's going on with a particular project. Give us some examples. Those are really, really beneficial for us to convey. It's not in situations where it's not at the city's it's not the city's fault that it's not moving forward. There are these other factors that we're working on. Maybe there's some crossing, whatever it is. There may be some things that you guys know that would actually provide us a little bit more detail. And that, I agree with Carla saying the definition in LUDMA is, well, that's an interesting question. Meg and Carson, Melissa.
Yeah, so
Carla.
Yeah, Carla's saying, so a lot of chatter, and we knew this would elicit chatter. So I think what we'll do two things. We'll answer this one from Carla. I think we'll have Alyssa just finish up her last few thoughts. Then we'll dive back deep into this. Carla's saying, okay, we should use the definition in LUDMA, which requires an approved land use application, not just a zoning designation. We're asking you to go beyond just that, is my understanding. Again, it's an imprecise snapshot of where you're headed. And there's a lot of discussion on the policy end. What is the state going to do with this? This is going to be skewed information. So let's get into that in a second and put a pin in it. Because this is why you're here. The letter just finished 2 slides and we'll get right back to it, okay? And thank you everyone for all the other suggestions in there. Is that okay, Christina? Okay.
Cool. So we'll cruise through to the end of the presentation. So recommendations, this is the same thing that you did last year. You'll be providing us with your experience with the report, your experience moving strategies forward, any recommendations that you have to HCD, the division, or any resources, technical assistance that you need that we'll pass on through our reporting conversations with partners and stakeholders. There were a lot of questions about reporting ongoing activities in the last year. So this is taken from 109A408, and for counties, it's 1727A408. So to report on ongoing strategies, this would be a strategy that occurred prior to the current reporting window. You have to give us a couple of things. One, you have to show that previous activity was a legislative activity or a funded project, something that your counselor commission had, your counselor county commission had input on. So you'll provide us with a list of those ordinances, land use applications, investments, etc. And then you have to demonstrate that the action is relevant to making meaningful progress toward your implementation plan, not just the strategy that you've selected, toward the implementation plan that your community adopted in your housing element. So this could be describing any outcomes or outputs that relate to your implementation plan, or describing how this was a first step toward moving your implementation plan forward, right? What's your next step in your implementation plan? I needed this activity that I did a year ago to be complete. Here are the outcomes that we're seeing as we move that forward. I have found that it works a little bit better to get into the actual meat of what you're wanting to report on. So I really recommend, if you feel like you need to report or want to report on ongoing activities, let's hop on a phone call or schedule a meeting so that we can talk that through. Here's some key dates and timelines. We already talked about the May 1st and August 1st timeline. Here's what you can expect from the rest of the process. Nothing has changed from last year on this process. So you will still have an opportunity for either a 90-day cure period or an appeal. We have mapped out in a flow chart what those options look like for you. So remember from last year, you cannot do the appeal request and the cure period at the same time. So your first notice of noncompliance, you can either select the cure period or request the appeal. If you get a second notice of noncompliance, you're offered the opportunity to appeal. So just keep that in mind as you move forward with your decision making if you do get a notice of noncompliance.
Give you like 3 more minutes, and then we gotta hop into some questions.
Yep. 90-day cure period. We'll skip over these because we've talked about that quite a bit. Incentives. This is the access to the ULCT and TTIP funds. If you include more strategies than are required, so 5 for communities without the tracks or bus rapid transit, and 6 for communities that have tracks or bus rapid transit stations. Penalties. So there's still the ineligibility for TIP or TTIP funds. There is also the state tax commission funding if you're non-compliant. Those 2 items have not changed. And this will be the first year that the $250 daily fee for non-compliance starts. So if your community receives a notice of non-compliance and you fail to cure, or the appeal board does not say, you know, HCD, this was wrong, they actually pass, you would be charged a $250 daily fee until the next reporting period. So we will be providing more guidance and details on that through the summer. I'll be providing several trainings, which here's, if you have the slides, you'll see a little bit of a summary of the fee for non-compliance. We'll skip through data and resources really quickly and just go straight to our trainings. I'm doing trainings throughout the summer and one-on-ones. We are also working with each of your associations of governments to host trainings locally. So I'll be visiting each of the AOGs at least once for an in-person meeting. We can sit down, workshop strategies, workshop reporting. I'm really there for you all to tell us what you need as you move forward with the reporting process. So I'll be releasing those dates as they are scheduled with each of the associations of governments. Since there are some questions, I think we circle back into, yeah, Christina, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. This is for the 3 of you. is there a singular place where all of these questions can be emailed to someone and you're creating an FAQ with the meat of these? Do you want to go over that?
We can certainly do that after this, and post it, on, our website and give a copy to, Alyssa as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Carson, could you capture, please, the comments? Because a lot of them, I mean, the questions, for example, that Curtis Poole just answered, we have a very clear definition, as clear as we can be, given the ambiguity of the language in the bill. But on the ADUs and how, if you passed it, how do you show action, those types of things.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Alyssa. Thank you for that, Christina. We will do some follow-up, and we're gonna leave this resource slide up. So here's what I heard, and we have a few more minutes here, but I do want to answer some of these that are coming in. So first of all, thank you, and thank you again for the suggestions, the inter chat there that's giving suggestions of what other folks have done. But I want to take two that are, I think, easy, and then we'll kind of delve into the others. And what I heard first was there were some questions earlier on about the market response and barriers. Is NIMBYism one? Is a developer didn't show up at the table even though we rezoned? Absolutely. And that's what we're asking for. Do we have the solutions to those? Not quite yet, but that's, if we hear again and again, it's this X issue, then maybe that, that gives us information to focus on. So hopefully it answers that first question. The second, we'll get into, I'll have Carson talk a little bit about the policy. It's more policy, like what are these reports actually doing to help and how are they moving the needle? We're spending a lot of time and effort, and where are these headed? So we'll put a pin in that. The entitled units will result in imprecise data, and the imprecise, data will be used against us, quotation marks, will reflect bad legislation. We'll answer that. We're going to answer, so those two are pins in it. We're going to answer Curtis, who said, I had this question last year and I did not ever get a real good answer. And maybe this applies to the rest of you as well. If a benchmark has been completed, in other words, a past ordinance, what is the progress for future reporting? We were told to come up with actions to report. So maybe you can take that one right off the bat.
That's a great question. Thank you, Curtis. And it does somewhat depend on what your strategy is and what has been ongoing in your community since you passed it, right? So an easy option for reporting could be using that ongoing strategy piece, right? So you adopted an ordinance a couple of years ago. And we'll say it's for accessory dwelling units because it's the most common strategy. So the easiest to talk about. So you adopted an accessory dwelling unit ordinance strategy. You now allow all of the different types of ADUs, internal, external, detached, all of them. You could report progress on applications received for those accessory dwelling units. You could report progress on building permits issued for accessory dwelling units that came out of that ordinance. Those all count as progress for you. If your community feels that you have adopted an ordinance and now the strategy is complete and there's nothing else to document or report on, you probably will need to update your implementation plan with a new strategy or new actions, because you will need to be reporting progress on something to meet that minimum strategy count. Christina, do you have anything else to add?
Okay, hopefully Curtis, that gives you a direction. If not, then when you can set up a one-on-one with Alyssa, or we can try to add that also in the FAQ as well.
Yeah.
So one other timing question, and then we'll get into the policy questions that I framed for Carson. So the reporting period, there's a little lag time. There's other suggestion about, can we make the reporting period ending on 6/30? So what is the reporting, just because of data collection? So concerns about not enough time, and also the few day lag period in between the last year's report and this year. So any thoughts on timing? Like, I'll let you answer.
So can we clarify timing? Like they want to submit their report on the 30th instead?
So specifically, one question was concerned that there's a little bit of a couple days lag time between when the reporting period ends and they submitted. And so is that going to be an issue, which I won't want to answer on your behalf. The other one is from Steve, and he's saying the report's due August 1st. Can we make the reporting period July 1st, 2023 to 6/30/2024?
Christina, is that you with a hand up?
Yeah, no, the deadlines are, the reporting is starts when your last report ends and continues until the deadline for the new report. So those dates are, Alyssa, and unfortunately, they can't be shortened or lengthened or any of those types of configurations. So Alyssa, what is their start date of the report and end date?
Yeah, so start date is listed in the reporting form per request. So it's August 1st through July 31st. So.
And that's for everyone, regardless.
Yep, everyone, and you can of course submit your report early, right? Like there's not a penalty for submitting. We were receiving submissions last year as early as May 2nd. So there's not a penalty for you if it works for you to submit earlier than later. There's just that, you're missing those couple of months at the tail end of your reporting period. So I hope if that didn't answer your question, let's connect and talk specifically about your scenario that you're looking at.
Okay, now we're going to dive into the policy ones, but I also don't want us to leave confused about the entitled, even though we may be confused of what the ask is, but there's certainly more time to ask further. But Carson, he's the policy director for a reason, and he gets to answer the policy questions.
So I just want to back up a few steps for background and context. And I know many of you were around back in 2019, but the genesis of the Moderate Income Housing Plan reports and the additional strategies was there was a sense of the Commission on Housing Affordability that local governments were not planning for housing, that local governments were not taking enough steps for moderate income housing. And so we fielded a survey of our policy committee, of our general members, and said, what are you doing to plan for housing? And we got back however many responses. We looked through and we took the themes and said, a lot of cities are planning for ADUs, a lot of cities are upzoning, a lot of cities are doing X, Y, and Z. So we built the strategies. Legislature said, okay, great, but is everybody planning proactively? We want to make sure that cities are actually taking steps to plan for housing with a focus on moderate income housing. So legislature created SB 34, which set kind of this parameter. They said, we want all of these municipalities in the urban periphery. The 5,000 number in cities of the third class was, again, not perfect. That's what the legislature chose to define that. And said, we want to make sure that cities are choosing at least 3 of these strategies to plan for housing and growth. So there's been a lot of changes to the reports, as you all know, and have been continuously frustrated about, but that's in an attempt to try to capture better information, to try to tell the story of local government planning for growth, to try to help legislators understand what actions cities are taking. Again, this is all largely been an attempt to show what you're doing proactively. We hear all the time from cities saying, look, we're concerned about our workforce housing too. These are the steps we're trying to take. And then you say, look, they might not be resulting in anything. The market's cold right now. Nothing's being built. We understand that. The whole point of the reporting is to show that you are doing what you can. You are using the tools at your disposal and doing what you can control to try to provide moderate income housing in your community. And yes, I know that these are long-term changes and some of them might not have the results you desire, and that's okay. Again, we're not trying to prove that you're solving the housing shortage. We're trying to show that you are doing what you can to get there. So that's the gist of it. At a high level, that's the rationale. And I can tell you that legislators look at these reports. There's an annual report from DWS every year. And when legislators see that you are taking this seriously, that you're doing what you can control, then they say, okay, let's partner with local governments. Let's try to create funding tools. Let's try to figure out how to plan proactively. And from there, the conversation is kind of more political than anything, but that's how this information is used. And it's a really critical tool for us to be able to tell your story at the Capitol every year. Does that mean that there's not going to be preemptive legislation? No, it doesn't. There's still preemptive legislation all the time. But it does mean that we can say, here's what cities are reporting, here's what cities are doing for moderate income housing, and that's really impactful. Was there anything else I should cover on the policy?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I know there may be further questions and you can always talk to Carson or I, but let's talk about the imprecise data coming from this undefined, but it is sort of defined, entitled units. And how that may, acknowledgement that it is imprecise and that why is that still important?
Yeah, and again, here's where this conversation started. We started looking at entitlements in the past couple of years, and what we found was there's not a crystal clear definition on where cities draw this line in the process. It is sort of imprecise by nature, just like all data around local government is sort of imprecise, just because local governments are all different. So when we're saying entitled, we use that term because we recognize that's imprecise, but it's the most precise baseline level of data that we can collect in statute. Christina knows we spent a long time going back and forth on what about this definition, what about this definition, what about this definition. And the problem is unless all local governments start either modify their processes to look pretty similar, or you start collecting data at a specific point, then we're going to be forcing somebody to change their process somewhere. And we wanted to avoid that this year. We wanted this year to be kind of, again, the baseline count. So that's what we're trying to do here. I recognize if you say, look, we consider this to be entitled, that's a fully entitled unit, awesome, report that number. But there's a lot of communities out there who are just not tracking it that way, and there's not an easy way to fit that into their system. And I wish there was. I wish we could have the most exact number possible, but it is going to be a little imprecise by nature. That's why we're asking you to just say how you got there. If you're actually looking about entitlements, awesome, report that information. But if you're just looking at raw build out, you can report that as well, or just say, here's how we're getting there. That helps us figure out what this number actually means. That helps us try to clarify some of the imprecision. So if we have 10 cities saying, here's our total build out based on zoning, we have 8 saying, here's our actual formal entitlements, that's still really helpful. It's still really impactful in the policy discussion. We're just trying to say, we're trying to cast a wide net, recognizing that not all of your processes look the same, but we don't want to totally disregard a community's numbers just because their entitlement process looks different than in other communities. So again, that's why we're asking you to just document how you got there. It doesn't have to be exhaustive, just saying, here's what this number means to our community. That's really the intent.
Carson, I need to just actually clarify that a little bit more. For our purposes, what we're looking for is, we don't care about your processes to approve a building permit. We're looking strictly today, and this may be changed in the future. All we want is you to have your zoning map, break it down. You're going to have some greenbelt, you're going to have open space, all of your entitled residential, not entitled, I guess that's not based upon your zoning map, what it is entitled. If it is R12 and they come in and they follow absolutely everything else in the municipal code, correct? That's the data we're looking for. Recognizing it could be entitled for R12 and a landowner, a developer could come in and say, we want an R18, or, I'm making these things up. Literally the baseline data that we want to look at right now for this particular report is what are the entitled lots, not your processes, that if they came in, they could build. So RA1 should be pretty simple, right? That's 1. You're going to count that lot as 1. Is that clear? I should pull up the comments again.
So we're a little bit over time. I think that I'll work with the league and we'll produce an FAQ and provide more detailed guidance because this seems like, we need to be able to, better get at what we're asking, and more clearly discuss with you all, what this data will provide for us in the long run. Ultimately, yes, yeah, we are asking for your entitled residential units that don't have a building permit. Our objective is to allow you to tell us specifically at what point your community considers those entitled. As we developed these questions, we got a lot of feedback that it's not the same across municipalities. So we will work through that FAQ and distribute it before the reporting period, and we'll get that information out. Like I said, if there are other questions, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to the league. I will be sending out the schedule of AOG meetings, and I'm also happy to hop on at any point to do the one-on-one assistance. Thanks, y'all.
So this will be recorded, and will be available online. We will get the FAQ, and as Alyssa mentioned, we'll figure out this.
It is complicated, and we recognize
and
that.
try to give you some more direction. And if we didn't answer something in the chat, you can email us. I tried to get them all. I know we kind of went off the rails there with entitlement. So we can try to follow up with us individually or with Alyssa. And on behalf of the league, thank you, DWS, for doing this with us. Christina and Alyssa, we appreciate the partnership. And to our members, we will try to continue to keep getting you some clarification and resources on this. So thanks for taking the time today, everybody.
Thanks, y'all. See ya.
Bye.
Thanks.